Hello, Martha.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. And you?
I'm doing great. Doing great. And I'm always glad to be talking about things that are important to us, So this is Martha Spinks, Dr. Spinks, actually, correct?
Yes.
And we are going to be talking today about building community for democracy. Two topics I think you and I both find very important. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely critical.
Yeah, they are. And it's, I think, the reason that both of us are spending time on things that, we could be doing other things, but instead we're working on these topics that are really important to us. So why don't we start here? I know that really for your whole career, you have worked on building community for, not always for political reasons, but as part of the work that you were doing. So help us understand why you believe that building community is so important, maybe in general, but also for the work that we're trying to do right now to advance democracy in our country.
Okay, well, I'll step in the Wayback Machine a little bit. I started out as a social worker, and a lot of social workers are engaged in mental health type services. But one of the things that I recognized being a social worker in the military was that a person's mental health, general health, and the success of the community really depended on all of those interconnected relationships. You couldn't really isolate one person in a psychological relationship and fix that, because there are all of these other factors and dynamics that exist outside of the clinic where you work with someone.
And I'm so glad that we talked a little bit about my day job when we got started, because I'm working with schools all the time, and SEL, social emotional learning,
yes,
mental health, San Antonio ISD, for the last year or two, I don't know, some large percentage of the initiatives that they are running district-wide is about the mental health of their students, about making sure that when they're sitting in the classroom, that they can actually be paying attention to what's going on, because of what's going on in their homes. And I love the fact that you have been doing this for military families. My wife in particular, deep connections to the military, and in my own work, I'm also working with military members, service members, contractors from time to time as well. So what you're building community in these, you were doing this in your Wayback Machine. Let's go back to your Wayback. go back to your Wayback Machine.
Yeah.
Tell us more about what you were doing.
Well, people tend to think of the military as a bunch of single men. And especially up until Vietnam, the military thought of itself as a bunch of single men. And then because of the way we were deploying people, previously we'd send a group of people for the duration till the war was over and they would come back. But now we're sending individuals to join a unit, and they're coming in as an unknown factor with a group of people who've been working together, although there's a continuous in and out. And that had a very disruptive effect on the functioning of the unit. But what the military also discovered is it had a very disruptive effect on the family. And of course it always had. It's just that we finally got to the 70s where women were coming more to the fore and having more to say and getting jobs outside the home. And the military, and that combined with the stresses of the kind of deployment pattern that we had from Vietnam, the military finally had to recognize that there was tremendous impact on the family, but more importantly for the military, because remember, they're not a bunch of social workers. They just hire a few of us. But they realized that this also had a tremendous impact on the ability of soldiers to perform. At the same time, there was research emerging from the Israeli army, same kind of thing, because they're sort of in a perpetual deployment. And they began to realize that when soldiers are in a combat situation, or really even a non-combat situation, but separated from their families and worrying about them, they tend to become distracted, and they are much more likely to become a casualty or cause somebody else to become a
Oh, my
casualty.
goodness.
So the Army, or actually the Department of Defense, built, a very elegant social welfare system. And this has always been kind of ironic to me, because people think of military people as being very conservative. And a lot of them are, but the fact is, it's a little island of socialism because we have guaranteed health care, we have subsidized child care, and we put a great deal of emphasis on looking after the general welfare of the families. So that's the environment I grew up in professionally, where the institution that people work for feels that it has first and foremost an obligation to see to the welfare of the family. And it was, in my mind, a brilliant system.
And the chance I've had lately I've been working with some military missions lately, and I've had the opportunity to work with Commander in that military mission. And I know that the welfare of the troops is a primary concern. And, I think that in part reflects him personally, but it also reflects the need for him to execute the mission. He knows he can't execute the mission if the troops are not in a good place.
Absolutely.
And the irony of military being, your health care is provided for.
Yes.
Right? I mean, there is a certain irony in the fact that that's the way the world is right now, when healthcare is so controversial outside of that space. So let's roll this forward a little bit. You eventually landed you were an executive director for 8 years of an aging organization, which you might want to mention briefly. But eventually, you landed here.
Yes.
And you started working with governments, and you eventually became involved in politics locally as well. We'll start to move the Wayback Machine to more recent back, something like that.
Okay.
And tell us what you've done more lately, and let's kind of land on community and democracy.
All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'll
ahead.
see if I can get there.
Yeah. Go for it.
After being in the military for 24 years, I wasn't nearly ready to retire, so I started looking around for other jobs. And the job I found was being the executive director of a nonprofit agency in inner city LA. In fact, my office is adjacent to MacArthur Park, where we saw all of the tanks going through the park last week.
That must have been something to see that.
Yeah.
To be watching that on TV.
It certainly was. But for me, the logic of taking that job was because it served Chinatown, Koreatown, Filipino town, and a very large Central American population in the center of the city. So in some ways, that was just a continuation of what I'd been doing in the military, and it was very attractive to me. But it also allowed me to continue working with this idea, because for me, it's not just work that you do, it's actually intellectually developing this idea about how it works and the mechanics of community. So that was another amazing opportunity for me to learn how people who are very different can live so well together with, sort of minimal effort to provide a decent environment. And this is a poor neighborhood, and it has crime. But essentially, it's a neighborhood of working people who are trying to raise their families,
if you have
who know each other.
Yeah, if you have common values that are bigger than yourself, and you're all focused on a common goal, that diversity really becomes a strength, which is, controversial today in ways that I have to admit I don't really understand why that's the case.
Yes.
You look at the impact. We could turn this now, which I won't let us do, but we could turn this to a conversation about immigration.
Yes.
And look at the impact that immigrants have had on our country. And and of course, the thing, it's almost cliche at this point, we're all immigrants. Except unless you're Native American, you're an immigrant, right?
Yes.
And it's fascinating to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more thing before I keep progressing toward getting us to here and now.
We'll get there.
because I wanted to be a part of that neighborhood. We had a staff of 60 social workers who, went to all the little houses and apartments around there. And because I wanted to be a part of that, I walked around there all the time and got to know the neighbors. And it was one of the most satisfying communities I've ever lived in. And it's unfortunate that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to live in an environment with that kind of diversity and that kind of closeness where you really get to know people and you begin to understand and trust and love people.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. And one thing I value about my own career, that I eventually had an opportunity to do a lot of international travel, and began to appreciate what was going on in other countries in ways that I wouldn't have before. I remember hosting some of the international folks that I was working with. I hosted them back here in San Antonio, and they were walking by the Alamo where there is a gazebo. Or I'm trying to remember if it's still there with all the construction going on. Probably not. There was a gazebo, and they looked at that and said, "That's very European." And I remember thinking to myself, I never thought of it that way, but oh my gosh, you're right. That is European, And San Antonio has so many, people who just barely know us think of us as a Hispanic city in many ways, but there's these influences from so many different cultures that are here, and very much European influence as well. So,
yes.
Okay. I promise not to let it go completely down that.
Okay. So from LA, I ended up back here in San Antonio.
Hey, what did you learn? You said something about intellectually you were learning the mechanics of what it means to build a community.
Well, people talk about community all the time, and in fact, in some ways, it's sort of become a security blanket, I think, since the recent political situation. I hear people talking about it all the time, and I'm so glad, because this is an idea that professionally I've tried to promote for so long. And so, of course, most of us understand what community is, showing up and being around people. But if you do what I do and you go off and get a PhD in social welfare policy, you start thinking about all the little bits and pieces that makes that possible. And so for me, I'd really have to reference a book by a man named Robert Putnam, who wrote a book called Bowling Alone. This was published in 2000.
I have not read it, but I've heard the name. Yeah.
Well, good news. You can stream something on Netflix that tells you everything you need to know about it. Some of his proteges did a video, and I think it's still streaming on Netflix, and talks about it. But he explains how he had a friend who owned a bowling alley. This was in the 80s, 90s. And he would go in, and there's a lot of bowling, and he'd say, well, business is looking good. And his friend would say, well, yeah, we have more people bowling now, but we don't have a lot of bowling leagues anymore. That's the big difference. So Putnam started thinking about that as he talked to his friend who managed the bowling alley. And what that led him to was writing this book called Bowling Alone. That's where he got the title. Because as he used that as an analogy for society at large, he began to realize that it wasn't just bowling leagues, but it was all facets of civic life were breaking down. People don't belong to Kiwanis anymore. Fewer people get involved in the Labor Day picnic, and there are a variety of factors. And a lot of it has to do with technology and the way it's tended to kind of isolate us, long before we had cell phones. And so the fabric has kind of come apart. And what happens when you don't have that kind of fabric in the community, where you see Joe once a month at Kiwanis, or you go to the bridge club, or the girls come over to the house for coffee in the morning, then it invites a kind of unfamiliarity that can become distrust. And then, to bring it back to the current political situation, people who want to put wedges between people can exploit that. Because if you don't know me and somebody else tells you who I am, that creates an environment where we not only quit working together. We quit trusting each other. And then it's easier for someone to separate us.
Yeah.
So there's community like, hey, let's all go out and have drinks. And there's community like, this is very serious business.
Right. And, I can relate to both sides of what you just said, because I know I've had challenges at time, trying to continue to work with folks with whom I know I have a deep disagreement on things, but I've persisted through that because, we've all got to be able to go out in the world and do a job, and we got to do it with a lot of other people and make a difference, and then the job I'm talking about is not fundamentally political, right? It's something we're working on together. But, I guess back to what you said, I've really felt both sides.
Yeah, and that's reflected in this lament that we hear from people all the time who keep saying, there was a time when Republicans and Democrats voted and disagreed, but it wasn't what it is now.
When George W. Bush was governor of Texas, agreed, disagree with what he did at that time. There was a bipartisan spirit in the Texas legislature that had existed for years and years. There were Democrats who were leading committees. And I believe, I don't know this for a fact, but I believe the reverse was true. Back to Ann Richards, right? When Ann Richards was governor, I believe the reverse was true. I'm not sure of that. But somewhere along the way, that spirit changed. And boy, I got to admit, I feel some of that.
I feel it a lot.
I wish we could get back to that spirit, but you can't just get back to it just by snapping your fingers. It's going to take work.
You can't go to the Republican and say, why don't we go out and have a drink and talk about politics? That's a frightening idea.
Well, Beto O'Rourke and Will Hurd's trip across Texas, right? I mean, there was a day when that would have been news, right?
Yeah.
So, so what? These two guys who were in different parties went on a road trip together.
Yeah, but I think
now it's news. My goodness.
I think what has changed is that because we don't know each other so well anymore, we've allowed people to define us. And, we're always talking about, well, I think if we all got together and talked, we'd realize that most of us care about the same things. And that's true. But there's been a kind of intentional effort with the use of language. Going back to Newt Gingrich, I really think he deserves so much credit for all of this, because he actually created a list of words and instructed
for anybody
people in Congress.
Who may not know, because not everybody's our age. So that's Congressman Newt Gingrich.
Yes, and, who was the leader of the House.
And the name, he was the Speaker of the House, right?
Yes.
And it was Contract for America.
Yes.
Right?
Although Democrats
that the other side
as the
called
Contract on America.
There you go. Exactly.
Yeah. But he actually
1990s, right? During the Clinton.
He was a contemporary of Clinton. Right. Yeah. But prior to that, there had generally been sort of a collegial relationship within Congress. And I think that, of course, had some influence on their constituents, too. But Gingrich came in with the idea that the way to win is to polarize people and really kind of declare war. So he had a list. You can find this online of these are the words you use to describe what Republicans are doing, which is all very positive. And these are the words he actually demanded that members of Congress use this set of words to describe what Democrats were doing. And then he had a whole campaign related to that,
right?
Telling Republicans that they needed to quit socializing with Democrats in Congress, changing the work schedule so that the Congress members were pushed home more on the weekends and had less time to spend with each other and develop community.
Right.
And then I think it's just proceeded and continued to become worse and worse.
I just caught myself saying right, but you actually have just told me a bunch of things I was not aware of as it relates to the things that he was driving.
Yeah.
back in that time. So now I'm going to bring us into not way back, but like way now.
Thank you.
Yeah, here we are.
I have a tendency to kind of meander off, so I appreciate that.
But this background is important because these principles, right? We have some principles. And, one of the principles that people who are doing the things that we're doing share is democracy.
Yes.
It's traditions, it's the values that it brings to us, the certain tolerance that is supposed to be part of a democratic system.
And we're asking each other all the time, how did this happen?
Yeah.
And this is how it happened. It started with somebody with a very intentional idea about how to win, and then it was something that just continued metastasizing. That
took priority over us being together,
yes.
being Americans together. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, anyway, so bringing us into Way Now, you and I are both working on trying to protect the democratic values
yes.
that we have. You are doing it as part of Bear Democrats
yes.
in particular. So we're about to have a conversation, which is kind of interesting given what we just talked about. We're about to have a conversation about how community can help Democrats
yes.
stay together and band together and protect our democracy. That, can I dare say, does not exclude the rare Republican who is willing to stand up and say that these are values that we should hold and to call their own to account.
Yeah, I certainly don't want to be exclusive because the whole idea is to bring us back together as Americans. So, one of the interesting conversations that we have, and eventually I'm supposed to talk to you about how I got involved in doing protests. So I guess I'll do that now. But one of the interesting conversations that we have when we organize these protests is coalition is really important. You need to make these protests bigger, and you need to get more and more people engaged. The other value in coalition is that those coalitions are connected to populations that we may not have a relationship with yet. And so sometimes we have discussions about, well, that particular group, there are some things that we disagree with about. And I keep telling them, this is what solidarity is. You have a whole bunch of Venn diagrams, and there's one thing in the center that we all agree on.
Exactly.
And that too is an important part of community, is to understand where you come together instead of being distracted about all of these outliers.
That's right. And to be clear, what I was saying earlier, not that Liz Cheney's planning to call me anytime soon.
Yes.
But if she did, that is one phone call I would run to take. Obviously there are a lot of policy disagreements, but my goodness, let's get to the point where we can get back to having a conversation about policy, and not about the things that are happening, the language that's being used, the actions that are being taken that are designed to divide us.
Yes.
Let's get back to that. So, how do we take these community principles and bring them to bear to drive a robust protest ecosystem in San Antonio?
Well,
how do we do? What are you doing already? How do we do that?
Partly, I'm learning how to do that right now.
Yeah.
But we start with the idea that you can pick any problem that you're concerned about right now, and there is nothing we are going to be able to do about that unless we do it as a community.
Yeah, amen to that.
So start with that. And then when you talk about protesting, and we spend a lot of time talking about the Constitution, although I think most people don't really know what it says. They like to talk about the First
Amendment.
Amendment.
Hey, can I make a recommendation right here? So Audible, I've been listening to Audible a lot lately because I can't listen to the news. Yeah. It's too much. And by the way, I found the news that really needs to find me finds me one way or another. So I have been listening to the U.S. Constitution for Dummies. You know the series, right?
Yeah, I've heard about that.
The Computers for Dummies and Windows Networking for Dummies, and you pick your topic, right? It is not for dummies. It is.
No.
It's, oh my gosh, Michael. Okay, this is terrible. I can't remember the name of the author is actually reading the book. It's the author reading the book. His first name is Michael. He's actually, I believe, a British MP, if I'm right. But I think,
yes.
But he's at a university, and it's fascinating listening to him. By the way, I've had a couple of sections where I've been listening to him and been like this, because I didn't necessarily agree with him, but it's really fascinating to listen to him go through that. So there's a recommendation for any of you who are listening. Go get U.S. Constitution for Dummies, or go pick up a Constitution and read it.
Yes.
Imagine that.
Or I can give you one more. For July 4th, we actually met on the 5th at a bar. There were about 100 people.
Oh, I saw this in the stuff you sent me.
We took turns reading parts of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the preamble, and it was just like it just hushed the crowd.
Oh my gosh.
And there were people there, in particular a young lady who was working at the bar, who said, "Wow, I never thought that much about the Constitution or what it says."
I will tell you, I've had an idea, and that's to read it on this podcast.
Yes.
To, just have a podcast where we read through the Constitution.
Yeah.
How long did it take, by the way? I'm kind of doing live market research here about how long did it take?
I think altogether it was maybe an hour and 15 minutes with people coming back and forth. As they get up on the stage, they read their little piece.
Yeah, that might be 2 podcasts. Not
how long
one,
it,
but.
yeah. But of course, there's a lot of shuffling around. We also had the Bill of Rights, the preamble, and all of that. So if it's just the Constitution, might be less.
Might be, yeah. Okay.
But the experience for me in that evening was that I've felt obligated to read through the Constitution, and I have. And it tends to be when you're reading it to yourself, blah, blah, blah. You sit in a room with other people.
Oh my gosh.
Who are paying rapt attention.
Another example of community.
Yes.
My goodness.
And you can just kind of feel this connection flowing through all of us as we realize that that's our heritage. And even at this moment, I'm kind of feeling some goosebumps from that.
A precious heritage.
And people have had a lot of conversations about that sense. And a lot of times it's not so much about, oh, I didn't know this was a word in the Constitution. It's more like, I still have this feeling from that evening and reading the Constitution.
You bring me to one of the topics that was in the materials you sent me, persistence. Yeah, just coming back to it over and over again.
Yes.
I mean, not those of us working on this, we're thinking about these issues every day at some level, right? We tend to forget that there's a lot of people out there who don't know the Constitution. I'm in education, and one of the things I wind up bringing up on almost every podcast we do is, in particular, I'm in STEM education. And I believe in STEM. I believe in STEM very deeply. But sometimes I wonder if we have swung that pendulum too far and lost sight of civics in that, and lost sight of helping our students understand the prescient nature of history and government, of our history of government in particular.
Oh, absolutely. And I understand that in some courses people don't even teach civics anymore, so it's not even addressed. But I have another little project I'm working on. I didn't tell you about this. I'm sorry for bringing this up.
Roll with it.
I recently found a fairly simple sort of 50-page long book that describes how our government came to be. And it starts with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and goes all the way down to municipal government. And you think, wow, you can cover that in 50 pages?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
But what I am trying to do right now is break that into a curriculum and ask community leaders, judges, lawyers, teachers, anybody who has a passion about this, to take turns teaching like a 60-minute segment that's based on this book, because the book gives you the bare bones, this is the structure of the government. But then to ask, say, a judge in a criminal court to proceed after explaining this is how the court system is set up, what her experience has been in the courtroom, and how all of these words that describe government and all of these kind of mundane practices reveal themselves into some extraordinary human experience in the courtroom, and then to just really give it life.
Yeah. Just experiencing it for real.
Yes.
Right. It is very, very different seeing it from a distance. With TV, right? We all watch TV. We think we understand the way this stuff.
In fact,
it moves so much faster on TV too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, everything gets resolved in a hurry.
And I was talking to a criminal court judge, making the pitch. Why don't you teach? And she said she would, but then she kind of got up on a sort of a tirade about, more and more people come into my courtroom and they think they know everything about the law from watching CSI. And it makes it much harder for me to do my job when I have to explain that to them.
I'm sure that's true across numerous topics, too. I have no doubt. How are you building community to help us do good protesting?
Yeah.
I guess John Lewis has been out there a lot lately.
Trouble.
Good trouble. How are you taking what you understand about community and driving?
Right. Well, going back to what I was saying about the Constitution, as members of a democracy, we not only have a right, but we have a responsibility to say what we think about what's going on. We cannot be a free people if we turn that over to someone.
That's right.
And not make an investment in it.
We have to occupy this space.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in an ideal world, we will all be going to city council to tell them what we think, in the state legislature and so on. But we don't have that kind of world because it's big and complex to begin with, and also because of all of the other political dynamics we're talking about right now. It's become very difficult.
Right.
But it is within our reach. What we have to look at is what we are capable of doing about that right now. And what we are capable of doing is coming together in the community to let the community know how we feel about what's going on. That's what a protest is. You articulate to someone what you think or believe or feel. And when a group of people joins you, and this again goes, back to my professional life, you start out as one person who has distress about what's going on, and you feel lonely and helpless. And then you get together with 3 or 4 people and you start thinking, they're seeing the same thing. And then the crowd gets bigger, and it not only amplifies the message that you're trying to send about our duty to talk about our government, it also gives people a sense of power. So what a protest is doing right now is calling on people to stand up for our country, first of all. But it's also bringing them together as a community to realize that we can trust and depend on each other. Mm. And that it's not just me feeling scared about stuff. A lot of reasonable people are surrounding me and saying, I feel the same way.
Right.
And then from that, you start thinking, what can we do about it?
And if you're not careful, you'll fall into the trap of thinking you're alone and thinking there's nothing you can do about it.
Exactly.
And then the next thing you know. So I'd never been to a protest. Well, that's not true. I think I went to one 8 years ago.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know what I was doing. I kind of showed up and looked around and left. Probably pretty embarrassing. Tell much more of that story.
Well, how did you feel when you left?
Well, I didn't connect with anyone, and so it's right back to your community.
Yeah.
It's actually, you know what? That's really interesting because I showed up, and no one at that protest came up to me and said, "Hi, I'm glad you're here. Who are you? What motivated you to be here?"
Yeah.
And so I didn't connect with it. And, so if I discount that one, then I'm just going to say it was maybe 5 months ago, the first protest I went to. And I had exactly that feeling. I looked around thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not alone here. I mean, I knew I wasn't alone intellectually, but now I felt it.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what, my goodness, you show up at this place, you look around, and you're there with, depending on whether it's a large, small, or micro protest, which picking up a topic from your materials, is it 10, 20 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, or like the one run by 5051 that
Yes.
their Democrats
We
helped
collaborated
organize.
on that. Yeah.
10,000.
10,000 people. Just blew my mind.
By the way, any of you who are listening to this right now, and you just heard that number 10,000, I want to
Yes.
make this very clear. There was a protest in San Antonio, based at Travis Park. 10,000 people showed up at that protest.
Yes. And that was a police head count.
That was police had indeed. And I remember there was one point fairly early in it where I kind of looked around and said, "Oh my goodness, we've multiplied by 2 or 3 the last one that happened at San Fernando."
Yes, we were running about 2,000 people at San Fernando.
And then it was like I turned around 25, 30 minutes later, and I think the marching through the street started a little early.
Yes, people got excited. They came to march.
That's right. That's exactly exactly.
So we did learn from that. For anybody who's going to come to the next one, we're not going to let speakers speak so long.
Oh,
people want to march. That energy
and learning, right? That we're learning how to do it. So anyway, okay. Somehow we got off topic, or
yes.
are we? Well, we're sort of off topic. Yeah. Anyway, more about community. How is community helping build these protests up? How did we get to 10,000 people? How did that happen?
Well, first, the first protest I went to, there were about 100 people in February. And then those people, I was asking you how you felt when you left. Those people were walking away saying, wow, I feel kind of energized and empowered from being here.
Which is how I felt as well.
Right.
The recent one.
So a lot of it becomes word of mouth, but then that's facilitated by this national movement that 50501 put together. So again, people all over the country start thinking, I belong to this much larger community. And I'm beginning to look and feel more powerful. And I also feel an obligation to this community because I was there last time and I know that we need to make the protest bigger next time. So I'm going to be sure and be there, and I'm going to bring more people. That's
right. Yeah. And by the way, I feel that too. I was not well in the last protest. I was, offline, not able to go. But I remember thinking to myself, that's a shame because I'm going to be one less person who's there, right?
And just listen to what that means. It matters if that one person shows up or not. And we've kind of grown up in a world where we start thinking maybe one person doesn't matter, but there's something about this movement that makes people
I'll
feel
tell you,
it.
From my day professional job, I will tell you that if you've got an event where you're planning on 70, 80 people showing up and you have 20, the energy level is fundamentally different than if you have those 70 or 80, or if you hit 100 or 120. It makes a huge difference in terms of not only the event itself, but the impact that it has going beyond that.
Exactly.
Event, and the perception that it leaves with the people who are watching that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there are these range. I kind of I did more than allude to it. I talked about it a minute ago. You have large protests, small protests, and then I don't know. I don't remember if there's a mini, but there's a micro protest.
Yeah.
What's a micro?
Well, again, this
protest?
goes back to I'm thinking all the time about what the mechanics of this are, and how it all spreads out. So in the beginning, back in January, when we decided we need to do something to bring attention to what's going on, there were about 100 maybe 200 of us who ended up at John Cornyn's office because we had to start somewhere.
This is downtown, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I was there.
And
right,
that was our.
I was there. Yeah, I was there not for the whole thing actually, because I think it was during the day. It was during a weekday.
Yes,
right?
It was about the middle of the day.
Yeah.
And so we didn't know what we were doing, but we figured how hard it could be. We just round up a bunch of people, go stand in the street, and yell about what we think.
Yeah.
And then that has grown. Again, because of coalition, as more organizations have come together and realized we share mutual interests, into this 10,000 event in Travis Park. But of course, it takes a lot of planning and organization to put on an event for 2,000 or 10,000 people, and you can't do one of those every day. So they work out to being about once a month. But the the question I began asking myself was, does that give the administration or anybody on the street who's just watching the impression that we're just dedicated enough to get together once a month and it's all over with? Mm-hmm. And so I am now developing mini protests with the help of more team leaders. You know, one of the things that's happened with the protests is, like it does with anything, leaders start evolving. And now I'm talking to some of those leaders and saying, I want you to take responsibility for a mini protest, which means, and it can mean a lot of different things, and it will have a lot to do with what people are able to do. But one woman, for example, said, I would be happy to go to John Cornyn's office once a week and take a group of people and tell them what we think. And keep in mind that in a lot of ways, John Cornyn's not really the most important audience for this. Think of all the people who are on the street, the people that we talk to nowadays, and we're thinking,
well, we know he's not going to respond, generally speaking.
He won't even let you in his office.
Yeah, exactly. I remember the earlier protest, right? Somebody tried to go up to his office.
Exactly.
Yeah, so much for being constituents, huh?
Well, I can't say that I was really surprised.
No, yeah.
But the opportunity for us was to stand just off Houston Street where there's a lot of foot traffic and sort of play Paul Revere and alert people something is happening. And when you start going down around Houston Street... Can
we make a thing of that, by the way? Play Paul Revere?
Yes, absolutely. This is our Paul Revere moment, to wake people up and tell them that there is something they need to be concerned about. So that is the function of those mini protests. It's community education. It's also practice for the people who are the leaders, because you not only get better at doing it, you learn more things about how to do it.
And that was one of the points I wanted to bring up too. Again, out of the materials you sent me, is how going to a protest helps you sharpen your own message about what you want to say, right? You're talking with other people, you're watching how they do it, you're trying to explain yourself. Mm-hmm. There's this classic lesson that you don't know something until you've tried to write it down or until you've tried to say it yourself.
And especially say it succinctly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Isn't that the truth?
Yeah. All of us have the experience of kind of getting tangled up in an idea, and then we talk and talk and talk, and you realize, I'm talking too much now. Probably not making a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But you go to these protests, and we generally organize them so that there are speakers. Sometimes they're politicians, but I actually prefer the ones where there are individuals who just have something that's really burning that they want to say.
Right.
And so we give people 2 or 3 minutes at the mic to give a succinct message about this is the result of this. For example, one of the things that we got kind of, I guess maybe mixed reviews on from some people was on July 9th, we went to Chip Roy's office, and we had intended to go there to protest the big ugly bill. But what had happened in the meantime was Kerrville.
Oh, yeah.
And so we decided that we would change our message and say, yes, we want to talk about the big ugly bill, but we want you to be aware that the consequences that you're seeing in Kerrville are just the first of a lot of things that are now going to be the result of that big ugly bill. So we had invited individuals who either in present time are affected by that bill or who anticipate that they will have challenges with that bill. And we have one person on our team who's a climate expert. And he used that as an opportunity to tie that bill to climate and the fact that not only the federal government, but the state is neglecting that.
Yeah.
And so
somewhere downstream, the things that are happening today are going to have a difficult outcome.
Exactly. So he is a climate expert, but he didn't deliver a dissertation. He knew how to package that message so that it was understandable to everybody in the crowd. And then the people hear that, and maybe they understand something about it they didn't understand before, But they also, as you said, sharpen their message so that the next time they're talking about to someone who says, well, I don't understand why that's important, or I don't understand what the effect is, they've had some practice.
Right. And we could, I want to wrap up with letters to the editor, and, we could take this idea of sharpening. But before we get to letters of the editor, I want to talk about a couple of ideas that you have opened my eyes to. Okay. Well, one is just a saying, but I think there's an important principle underneath this. Solidarity and demonstrations in large, I'm reading, by the way, off of the board over there. Solidarity and demonstrations in large numbers can turn the tide on an outlaw government.
Yes.
I love that. Why is that?
Why does it work?
Why does that work?
There's a woman named Erica Swinson, a scholar, who's actually done studies of peaceful protests going back several decades.
Yeah.
And she measures the effect, size of crowds, frequency, how long it goes on, and then did it change the government or did it end up in toppling the government? And so she actually can show you statistically that if about 3.5% of a population consistently shows up and continues the pressure on government, there's a good likelihood that you're going to be able to turn that government.
You're going to be able to drive change.
Now, that's not a guarantee, of course.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating that somebody would have that kind of research. And what that translates to in our country is if we can consistently, like in these 50501 demonstrations, turn 11 million Americans out on the streets, it's quite likely that we can have some impact.
Right. And what was the last round of protests? What was the nationwide count? Do you know?
I do not know for sure, but that's the one where
It was
Antonio.
It was
millions of people, and I'm thinking somewhere between 5 and 7 million, but I don't have that number right on me.
Yeah, and I had the same thought, that 10,000 number. If you just take that number, which maybe we would use a different number, but if we just take that one, 10,000 people, that is about 1 in every 150 residents of the San Antonio area.
Yeah, I'd have to get out my pencil and scribble
something
that
along.
math.
Yeah, I had done that math. So it's not 3.5%, but we're just getting started.
Well,
right?
You think the previous month we had 2,000, and the next month we had 10,000.
Yeah, indeed, and there's overlap. So you start to look at that. And, one way I like to think about this is if I went to a large, say, 75,000 person event at the Alamo Dome, how many of those people were also at the protest? And you can do the math on that. So out of those 70,000 people, there would have maybe been 5,000 to 7,000 people at I think 500, 750. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. About 500, 750 of those people at the protest. Some of the people you're walking by out when you're going to concessions, a bunch of them were there, right? And, it's that 3.5% number or whatever it is, right? You get to a point where it becomes pervasive because you run into so many people.
Yes.
When you're, in your daily life, right? And you're hearing this message all the time. And that saying for me, it makes me think about the 1960s, right? It makes me think about other nonviolent protests that have gone on around the world that have demanded change.
Exactly.
And over time that change came. I also really love, this is a little more academically geeky, this next one, but let me see if I can paint the picture for people who are listening. This is a 2x2 table, and the rows are change observed and change not observed, and the columns are immediate or delayed.
Yes.
And, as somebody who's doing education a lot of the time, I relate to this because we'll have literally tens of thousands of students coming through every year. And, sometimes I can see the change immediately, but not nearly as often as I would like. I'd love to see it. But I know as an educator that some number of those students are going to be influenced by the thing that they saw that day in a way that I'll never witness.
Yes.
Maybe today, maybe in 6 months, maybe in 10 years, that evidence would come out. And I know you feel that is an important principle in community building.
Absolutely. I tell people, I guess you're going to have to ask yourself whether the time that you spend at a protest resulted in a success or a failure.
Right.
And if you go to a protest, even with 10,000 people or 5 million people, and Donald Trump doesn't resign the next day, that's not a failure.
No.
Because you had that many people who showed up.
Man, am I praying for that.
Yeah, yes. But those people,
Yeah, not going to happen.
those people walked away with more determination, maybe, walked away with another idea about what they can do. And equally important, all of the people who are around on the fringes who are just observing this walked away with something.
Yeah.
There's going to be somebody who's thinking, maybe there is something wrong with what's going on.
The circle of influence just expanded a little
Exactly.
bit, right?
Exactly.
And it's just going to keep expanding if we stay with this. Before we wrap up, let's talk about letters to the editor. Mm-hmm. You have a class that
Yes.
I think you built it with someone else, right?
Yes, Ann Pearson, who's a retired journalist.
Oh my God! Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
About how to write letters to the editor, and there's the little short ones, and then there's the longer ones.
Yes,
if I remember right. So maybe we'll come back and talk about letters to the editor in the kind of depth that we just.
I'll teach an online class.
There we go. But what would for folks who are listening, maybe just very briefly, like why would it be worth your time to write a letter to the editor? Why do it? And then if you're going to do it, what are a couple of principles you ought to follow in doing it right?
Okay. Well, the answer to the why is Ann and I were talking, and she was saying, what is something that we could do that would have an impact? And from that, we decided, she's a writer, I'm a writer, I'm an incurable writer of letters to the editor, and she's a journalist. So maybe something that you can do is teach people how to write those letters so that they get printed. And in the process, again, all of these other things are happening. In the process, people feel empowered if they even write a letter that has a lot of clarity and they think, yes, that's exactly the point I was trying to make. And then if it gets recognized by being published in the paper, you think, wow, I guess I'm a pretty good thinker.
Yeah.
And as citizens, again, going back to that duty to let people know how you feel about your government, that's a very public way that you can express how you think your government should be going. So it's a kind of public forum, and it gives people an entryway into it. And then you asked me another question. I'm not sure I'm recalling
so
it.
it was the why and the how to do it.
Yes.
I think you covered them both.
Yeah,
you got it. So, all right. Any other big thoughts about building community for democracy that you want to share? What's your wrap up thought?
My wrap up is, even if there had not been a Donald Trump, we have issues about our community and our civic life. He simply exploited something. He didn't create it. He exploited the spaces that have managed to enter in between us. So let's say that somehow or other we got the president that we wanted, or we got the governor of Texas that we wanted. We still have to learn to come back together again, because there are so many huge factors in our society that we have to deal with, from technology on down the list. And that cannot be done if each of us try to do it as an individual.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thought to wrap up. My wrap-up thought's much more boring than that, but I got to do it anyway. If those of you listening, if you would like to see these materials that I kept referring to, they're much more inspiring than that. These are it's essentially a white paper on organizing protests. It's how to do a letter to the editor. It is, I think one is a flyer from Bear Democrats or from related organization. Mm-hmm. You can go to speakusa.org/podcast-build-a-community. Sorry for the long name, but I wanted it to be good English, kind of, sort of. So let me say it again. speakusa.org/podcast- not an underscore, a dash. Build community. It's all one word, no uppercase, none of that sort of stuff. Go see those materials. They can really help you. Martha, thank you so much for joining us. And let's do this again sometime on the next topic, shall we? All right. Thank you all for listening to the Speak USA podcast today. Let's all go protect our democracy.